day two of the House Select Committee's hearings on January 6th, Chairman Bennie Thompson told reporters that the panel will not make any criminal referrals of former President Trump or anyone else to the Justice Department. Meanwhile, Vice Chair Congresswoman Liz Cheney released a statement pushing back on the chairman's comments. She said that the committee will make a decision on criminal referrals at the appropriate time. So for more on this, we want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Keir Dougall. Keir, thanks for joining us. It certainly seemed with the opening statements like that they were not just, I've said this several times, that they were not just trying to put together a list of recommendations, they were going a step further. And then when we heard yesterday, not only the testimony about whether or not the president believed the big lie, but also the way that that was used to raise money and what that money was spent on, it certainly seemed as if the panel was trying to sort of connect this untruth, deliberate untruth or mistruth or lie, to the use of money, which is not about, democracy and the threat to democracy. That's about a whole other thing. So how does the House Select Committee have the authority to make a criminal referral on this matter? Because they're not a criminal investigative body.
Right, there's a lot there to untangle, and those are great questions. So the House Committee itself obviously is not the decider on criminal charges. It's the Justice Department, and under our constitutional separation of powers, there really are independent things. In this context, a referral is really just a recommendation. Effectively it's a tip. If it's coming from Congress, it carries a little more oomph, something that would demand attention from the Justice Department more than just perhaps, or get higher level of attention than some random tip. But we've already seen reports in the press that Merrick Garland has said, I will be watching these committee hearings from start to finish, and he has said that he would ensure that all of the January 6th prosecutors would be doing the same thing. So this idea of a recommendation, it's already coming through the hearings themselves, to the extent there is one, and through the press.
So, Keir, help me understand something. And obviously, I don't have a criminal mind. My grandpa used to say I don't have any mind at all. But let me try to work through sort of what we've been listening to and try to understand what the potential legal ramifications could be for the former president in his role in the insurrection. You've started to hear this narrative building. You've heard it even from Bill Barr that the former president may have actually believed that he won the 2020 election. And so that when he went out and spoke to his supporters and told them that the election was rigged and the election was fraudulent, he believed that. But the January 6th committee is slowly establishing that, in fact, the president didn't believe that. He knew when he was speaking to his supporters that he had lost the election. In fact, you heard somebody yesterday, I think it was one of the lawyers, say it wasn't even close. The election wasn't even close, right? And so if he believes that he won the election, that's one matter in legal terms, right? But if he actually lied to his people, he lied to raise money, he lied when he was debating others about this, that's a different legal pitfall. Those are the two questions that I have. Whether you believed it, that's one thing. And if you knew it was not true and you still lied to the people about it, that's another.
Vlad, with all due respect to your relative who questioned you, you have a mind like a laser beam, because that is the exact question that a criminal prosecutor would be focusing on, right? So these crimes require intent. Did you knowingly intend to say a lie that would then spur a coup, effectively foment a coup, and do all these other things, the consequences of potentially a fraud with respect to the fundraising? And what I've heard in the committee hearings that when, as I'm listening to it with my former prosecutor's ear, I'm hearing a lot of circumstantial evidence. And I'm hearing the committee try to inoculate what Trump's expected defenses would be if there ever were a criminal prosecution related to this. I've heard a lot about how Rudy Giuliani and perhaps some of his other lawyers were wrong. They were disagreed with by the Team Normal, as one group named itself. That question right there leads us to ask, was President Trump getting bad advice? At the time, I have no reason to think that Rudy Giuliani and these other lawyers were anything other than licensed in good standing. Now, we know now that they've been subject to disciplinary proceedings, some of them, and there have been some consequences for them. But at the time, a defense lawyer, I would certainly expect a defense lawyer to say, hey, he was getting advice from attorneys that were telling him that this was a position that he could take. Bill Barr in his testimony also referred to a report by someone who had claimed to be an expert about election analysis, claiming that there was reason to believe that there potentially could be more votes out there for President Trump. Now, Bill Barr's testimony was, well, I looked at the report and I thought it was flimsy, but that raises the question for a defense lawyer, if President Trump were ever to be charged, is, did he rely on that, and did he rely on bad advice? There's a there's a critical distinction in the criminal law between making a mistake and doing something intentional. And what I did not hear much of, other than circumstantial evidence being described by the committee, was, President Trump, acknowledging in some form or fashion directly that he knew that this was, that what he was saying was wrong.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That is very interesting. And what will also be interesting, I guess, ultimately, is you asked that question, Emery, at the very top to Keir about this fund, this legal fund that was set up, where the committee alleges that he basically bilked his supporters of millions and millions of dollars. And if that turns out to be, if they can prove that, do they set up a fund where President Trump's supporters can actually demand restitution? And how he would, I could see that, because he loves to go to court and sue, and to, that could be fascinating.
Yeah, it will be very, very interesting. And I think that's such a great point about intent. And that is a challenge. Like, unless you have, the president saying, I know I lost, but let's go forward with this anyway.
Right, you need that. That becomes a smoking gun. Where somebody says, hey, he said to me, hey, you know what? It's over, but I can't let the people know that.
Hey, there's several more days of hearings, so we'll see what they have. Keir Dougall, thank you so much.